Hello, I'm Chris Davis, and I'm going to be presenting on the Lake Huron telemetry projects. This is an update from myself and other researchers. We're working on acoustic telemetry projects that are either active, planned, or proposed throughout Lake Huron. I'm going to start off by talking about the three active projects that we've got throughout Lake Huron. It includes two lake sturgeon projects and one Cisco project. The oldest still active telemetry project on Lake Huron involves adult lake sturgeon movements in Lake Huron Erie corridor. It's got a variety of partners. It's been ongoing since 2012. It's going to be active at least until 2022. Its objectives are to define seasonal movements and population structure of lake sturgeon that spawn in the Detroit and St. Clair rivers. It's looking at those movement patterns and characterizing individual and population level variability, as well as describing habitat use in open waters of Lake Huron and Lake Erie, making use of other receivers. There's currently around 200 adult sturgeon that are tagged in this project. The second active project in Lake Huron also involves sturgeon. Looking at the spawning and overwintering movements of Lake Sturgeon in the Garden River and St. Mary's rivers, conducted by the Anishinaabe Ontario Fisheries Resource Center and the Garden River First Nation. This is mainly looking at sturgeon spawning and migration in the Garden River area, as well as looking at movement patterns throughout the year, non-spawning season in the St. Mary's River area. To date, there are 59 lake sturgeon that have been tagged with V16 transmitters through years 2016 to 2018, largely marked by capture in the Garden River area, Lower Garden River specifically. Two different types of receiver have been applied in this project: acoustic release receivers in the St. Mary's River itself, and grapple style receivers in specific spawning areas in the Garden River. There's also a number of other partners that have employed use of receivers to contribute to this study throughout the St. Mary's River area. The third active study that we have is movement of habitat use of Cisco in the northern parts of northern Lake Huron in and around the Les Chenaux Islands area. So a variety of partners again on this project. Its main objectives are describing the habitat use of shorthead Cisco in the area, looking at the timing of movements and the spawning grounds, and then determining the extent of post-spawning movements. So it's a capture of adult Cisco in spawning condition. This is late fall using boat-mounted electrofishing. So fish are tagged and released in that area, Government Bay and Hessel Bay. So far there have been 200 V9 transmitters tags applied through the fall of 2018 and up until and including this coming fall 2021. And it's a 100 receiver array in that area. So there are some preliminary results from this, and just looking at Cisco overwinter movements near the spawning grounds within the islands, and offshore movements through the summer and fall period. So here we have a display of the area that's covered. It's a fairly dense receiver layout and really designed to get the idea of those fish movements immediately after spawn and then through the summer season. We have a number of planned projects as well. So these are ones that are approved and are just getting underway. So there's two: Lake Whitefish and Ontario Waters, Lake Huron, and then Lake Trout and Thunder Bay. So the first project, which I'm involved with, is together with Giguyak. It's to look at the broad scale movements of Lake Whitefish in the Ontario Waters of Lake Huron. Again, several partners and researchers involved in this project. So the objectives here are to characterize the broad scale movements of Lake Whitefish and Lake Huron, primarily looking at sort of filling in knowledge gaps in the Ontario waters. A critical component of this project in particular is that it will be looking at Indigenous ecological knowledge and combining that in the two-eyed seeing approach to provide more complete picture of what's happening. We do plan to also include other species, like the lake trout, in years to come, to look at the overlapping distribution with lake whitefish. So here's the tentative plan that we have currently for both transmitters and receivers. By the end of the project, we plan to have 700 transmitters in various populations of lake whitefish throughout the Canadian waters of Lake Huron, and 122 receivers throughout the basin, mostly deployed in a uniform pattern, with another 25 of those in more strategic locations to cover areas that weren't kind of captured in that uniform distribution. So the second project that's planned is and approved is the lake trout colonization of artificial reefs in the Thunder Bay area of western Lake Huron. So this project follows up on some previous work that had been done in this area that showed some patterns of usage of an artificial spawning reef compared to some traditional spawning reefs that have been used. So the objective is to look at whether reef colonization is done of the newer artificial reef is done by younger fish that have limited spawning experience, to determine if that is increased relative to traditional spawning sites since the work that was done in 2014. This is just to look at if younger fish are more likely than older fish to be using the Thunder Bay artificial reefs rather than East Reef, which is the traditional spawning site. So this study will use a virtual positioning system receiver array. There's 23 receivers that'll be deployed from August to December in each of the years 2021, 22, and 23. There's going to be 100 adult lake trout tagged with V16 tags this coming fall 2021. So now looking at the proposed projects, these are the ones that are not yet approved but are in various stages of application. There's 5 projects in this class. Looking at the first study, juvenile Cisco in Saginaw Bay. This would involve tagging of hatchery-reared Cisco with Innovacy predation tags in the 180 kilohertz band. It's the only project applying these 180 kilohertz tags in the lake proposed. So it's to look at the proportion of hatchery-reared Cisco dispersing more than 4 kilometers from the release location, which is the extent of the array. To look at whether the hatchery-reared Cisco coincides with changes in water temperature or water current, if there's things that are driving that distribution, and determine if the proportion of Cisco consumed by predators during the first 4 weeks after stocking. So that's basically the expected life of the tags. So Cisco are going to be tagged in the hatchery and then released along with the untagged fish in Saginaw Bay. And there's 48 receivers in the array. So this is a project that was submitted in January 2021, and if funded would begin in August of 2021. So here's just a map showing the proposed layout of the receivers. You've got the kind of the Saginaw Bay area in the left panel, the large scale, and then the close-up of the study area. So with the white area being the release site, and then the red circles being individual receiver locations. So second study in this category is the habitat use and movement patterns across Lake Whitefish Stock Complex in Lake Huron. There's several investigators and agencies involved in this. It's at the pre-proposal stage through the GLFC. And this is very similar to the Ontario project that I described earlier, looking at Lake Whitefish to determine correspondence of movements and the management units of the different stocks. Secondary objective to determine if the spatially explicit seasonal habitat, bathymetric and habitat use is related to specific characteristics of the fish, body condition, spawning stock, or if they're more habitat related issues such as depth, temperature, and productivity. This is a map showing the proposed receiver layout. So it would be to augment, as I said, that study that in Ontario waters, it's in blue here. So the proposed receivers here are in red. And then similar to the Ontario project, there would be other strategic locations, perhaps spawning areas that would be covered as well. So there's a 5-year commitment for this, for receiver management, that would go from 2022 to 26. And a proposal for 200 adult lake whitefish, also with the 69 kilohertz acoustic storage data storage tags. One difference in this is that these would be the data storage tags, which not only transmit ID depth and temperature for readings by the receivers, but if the tags are recovered, there's recorded depth and temperature along with those. The third project in this category is St. Mary's River Lake Sturgeon. So looking at the critical habitats and population characteristics, it's proposed to go from 2021 to 26. This would augment the existing sturgeon project in the St. Mary's River area. So looking at the habitat used by life stage, including not only the adults, but also sub-adult life stages, looking at river population abundance and survival. And then to try and get a better idea of the St. Mary's River sturgeon population. So this would include a variety of agencies working throughout the area. So the species, as I said, is lake sturgeon. There would be 56 additional receivers in that area. There'd be another 40 adult sturgeon tagged and 40 juvenile sturgeon tagged. A slightly smaller tag in the juveniles because the body size, they'd be the V13s instead of 16s with a little bit less battery life. So here's a map of the proposed sites. The smaller circles are already the deployed receivers. The larger circles would be the new receivers that are proposed for this study. So the expected adult tagging area would be towards the upper reaches of the St. Mary's River, and juveniles down in the lower reaches. This just corresponds to where the different age groups are expected to be. The next project I'm going to describe also involves lake sturgeon. This would be looking at the sturgeon that are stocked in the Saginaw River system. So using detection data from acoustic receivers to look at the dispersal distances, how long the fish utilize the river habitats, and then to see if the characteristics of 1 and 2 differ between fish that are reared streamside versus those that are reared in traditional hatchery systems. So this will involve fall fingerling sturgeon, lake sturgeon that are implanted. They're going to be, around 6 to 10 inches or 150 to 225 millimeters in size. Expecting 320 fingerlings tagged over a 2-year period. These would involve smaller tags, but in the 69 kilohertz bandwidth as well. The V7 tag in this case. Expected to have a battery life of around 325 days. This is just a map of the study area showing the deployment of receivers throughout the Saginaw River area and 5-kilometer spacing within Saginaw Bay. So the fish would be released into the different tributaries and tracked through those systems. And there's several agencies involved in this project as well. Another proposed project in the Saginaw Bay area involving walleye. This is to look at the sources of walleye recruitment and natural reproduction within Saginaw Bay itself. It's a pre-proposal with the GLFC, a number of researchers on this one as well, and agencies. The background here is that the Saginaw Bay's walleye populations reach recovery targets, but it's unclear where that reproduction for those fish is coming from, whether it's a river system or if it's in the newly built spawning reefs offshore. So looking at different possible receiver deployment options, If it's fun, expect to tag 200 walleye in year 1 and then another 100 in year 2. The project would begin in the spring of 2022. And I think you're looking at maybe be able to combine this with other projects in that area and make use of receivers that are deployed elsewhere. So this is just a map of the all receivers that are either currently deployed, planned, or proposed, and the coverage that there would be for Lake Huron under those circumstances. So you can see there'd be broad and reasonably complete coverage for most of Lake Huron waters if these planned and proposed projects go ahead. So looking at the currently active projects, there's 59 adult sturgeon so far tagged in the St. Mary's River. There's another 280 adult sturgeon tagged in the Huron-Erie corridor. We've got 50 adult lake whitefish tagged in western Georgian Bay and 200 adult cisco tagged in the Lake Huron Islands area. The planned work will include eventually another 650 adult lake whitefish tagged in Ontario waters, or a combination of lake whitefish and lake trout, and 100 spawning lake trout to be tagged in the Thunder Bay area. And on the proposed side, another 80 sturgeon in the St. Mary's River, 40 adults per juveniles, 200 adult lake whitefish throughout U.S. waters of Lake Huron, 27 stocked ciscos tagged with predation tags, 300 spawning walleye, and 320 stocked lake sturgeon. That's all. Thank you very much.